How are you doing, people of the internet? My name is Odor Jagero, and this is Dialogues with Jagero. In Africa, we have always tended towards the new religion that was brought to us by the white man, for a lack of a better word. Yeah, and sometimes I think about my ancestors. The father to my grandfather obviously was died before the colonizer came. And I'm just wondering the gods that they used to pray to, how they used to, where they used to take their problems. And so today we are going to be talking about African spirituality in a deeper way. And this is a series by none other than Mildred Awino.
Thank you.
How are you doing, Awino?
I'm very well, thank you, Jagero.
Yeah, I said in our first interview, in Dialogues with Jagero, that I am a Christian, born again. I sort of believe that God exists because I have an experience and a testimony. But then there is a question that never leaves you, that the people that died before Christianity came, how are they judged? Are they going to heaven? Are they going to purgatory? Where are they going? Did they have any sort of morality? Did they think that there is a higher God, above them that looks over everybody? Now let's talk about that. In our first series, as we agreed, we are going to be talking about the cosmology of African religions. It's a very deep statement. Even the phrase is very deep. So the woman with the knowledge, will expound it for us. So what is, you said that we are going to be talking about the hierarchy.
Right.
So probably, first of all, background. And then where do we go from here? Yes.
Excellent. Great questions, Jagero. And I'm very excited to dive into this topic because it's something I get a lot of questions about. And it's also a bit complex, so I love that we've just had set aside some time to sit and discuss it. Now, about African traditional religions, there's so many Africans that really don't have an idea or the bigger picture or even the complete picture when it comes to how our religions operated, the kind of deities we had, where do the ancestors fit in, do we worship the ancestors, what did we used to do? So I can definitely say that there's a widespread notion that African religions are polytheistic, where there are many gods. Yes, there are many gods, and I would say these are pantheons. However, in the space where there are many gods, there is actually a supreme being at the top of the hierarchy, which is why it is called hierarchical monotheism. And how this works is that there is a supreme being who is not to be confused with the creator God. So that the god of the African was seen as very distant, very unknowable, mysterious, and I can even illustrate this in our own culture because we know of Nyasai, isn't it?
Yes.
But Nyasai is just one of the many names because we would beseech this supreme creator through the sun or through the ancestors. So the supreme being was called Jok. Right, or Jok. In the Nilotic tribes, actually, if you go to Sudan, their supreme god is called Jok. And I know we have that name as reflecting an ancestor, a very significant or important ancestor. Somebody like Ramogi or Gor Mahia would be considered a Jok. However, the name itself really means the supreme being, the supreme creator. Even the word Kumu, which means mysterious, or works in mysterious or secret ways. So what the African understood in terms of the supreme being is that he is so far removed from creation that a lot of African societies were not really including him in their beseeching or their prayers. They were beseeching through the creator gods. So how that would work, because I want to get into explaining it and illustrating it even with religions and how this comes about. Remember in the last talk we had, Dialogues with Jagero, where we talked about transcendence and immanence. Is your God transcendent? And transcendent means the God that is supreme, high and completely distant, where he only created the cosmos. And then from there, he stepped back. And then he left that job to the creator gods under him, who then went ahead to create the earth as we know it, or separate the earth, the heaven and the earth. And if you see if you look at Genesis, we see the very same thing. Genesis 1 and 2. You see that in the beginning, the Spirit of God was roaming across the waters, and then he said, let there be light, and he separated the heavens from the earth. And something interesting, by the way, I was reading that chapter last weekend, and it said something interesting that separates when he was speaking the firmament into being, he said, let there be a firmament or an expanse to separate the waters from the waters. So there's two kinds of waters here. The waters that are above the sky, and this is where, remember, we were talking about how the ancestors dwell in the waters. But then now there's the waters of the earth. So what then happens is that after the supreme being, we have the creator God, and the creator God is the one that is usually prayed to by the many cultures, right? And then after the supreme being, we also have pantheons of gods. If you look at West Africa, the Yoruba, and I know you've heard of the Orishas, there's a supreme being as well at the top, Olorun, and then now Olorun had children. And then now these children are the ones who then created the earth, or as the Yoruba know it, and became even some of their first ancestors in some of these cases. Now, I want to go into a concept called the distant God, or the God that is at rest, or the God that does not need to work. And it's called Deus Otiosus. Deus Otiosus. Or an Otios God.
What is that line? What is that name?
Deus
Is it Latin?
Yes, it's Latin. It just means the distant God. And the description of this Otios God really it gives you deja vu for the Bible, because it's the God who is at rest. If you remember Genesis 1, it says that after creating the earth, or the cosmos, God rested. And by resting, it means he retreated. Now, if you look at Genesis 2, it becomes very interesting, where the God moves from very distant, this kind of Otios God that we are describing, and now becomes a God that is on the earth. He's walking in the Garden of Eden looking for Adam and Eve, asking, where are you? He's putting them together using clay. And this therefore means that he's a creator God, right? So Christianity is interesting because they've merged those two concepts of the supreme being as the creator. But when you come to Africa, that is not the case. We are very clear that the supreme being pre-existed. And our creation stories, if you notice, always begins when the earth has already been created. In some ways, the African knows or understands or is conscious automatically that creation is bigger than us. The cosmos is bigger than us. And in some of our mythologies, some of the first ancestors would come either from the sky, like the Maasai, in a cow skin, much like this one, or they would be coming down from trees, or from some place, or actually out of the water. So a lot of these references could actually be historical memory, because remember, we did have a few cataclysms during the last ice age, and there's a lot of water, which
what does that mean?
The story of the flood, isn't it? When the earth there was a deluge.
Yes.
And it was a natural cataclysm.
The Bible one?
Yes, it's related in the Bible, but it's also there in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The flood story, you'll find it in many myths around the world.
Oh, really?
So it is something that historically happened. It's just that the timing and how it is told differs according to the society at play. But for us Africans, where you don't
That is interesting, because as Christians, we thought we monopolized that story.
No, you do not monopolize the flood. Though you've captured it, and it's interesting. That's why it's still important to study Christianity vis-a-vis, our culture, so that we can understand where certain myths are placed. So for us as Africans, you might not find so many flood narrations, but you will find what happened after the flood, which is where our stories start with our first ancestors descending from trees, high places. And you can see the same thing happened in the Bible with Noah, where the ark itself was somewhere that was elevated, and they had to rely on birds, for instance, to bring them back news. Another interesting thing is that birds play a big role in creation in African societies, and we can also see that after the flood story, right? Now, we've also seen cases where the God does not even come into play. The supreme being, like for the Mijikenda, they say he's so out there that for them it is just the ancestors who they will pray to. Now, from our last discussion, we talked about how the ancestors are simply emanations, right? They are manifestations of the Supreme Being. They are what you call the dead gods, the ones who die and rise again as spirits. In the Bible, they are described as the spirits of just men made perfect. So these are our angels. These are our intercessors, isn't it? So we do not approach the ancestors as gods. We approach them as you would a saint or like an angel. Right. So when you look at the high gods for us as Luos is called Jok, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that name is also related to the first ancestor, like I mentioned before. So for instance, I would ask you, Jagero, which clan are you from? So then based on that clan, who is the Jok of that clan? Who is the founding ancestor? Or the one that really gave the name of that clan to it? Right, so it's important, and that's where our veneration started from. Now there's the joke of the clan, but then there's the joke of the entire tribe, isn't it? Now for us as Luos, we know Ramogi, we know Podo, right? Labongo, Anyipir, Dimo. If you can go back, when you start talking about Ramogi, you're in Kenya still. When you start talking about Labongo, Anyipir, you're in Uganda. When you start talking about Dimo, you're in Sudan. So you can keep tracing back the ancestry of the Luos as we were migrating, isn't it?
There is when in Luo, which is a culture that we share. Yeah. You say Nyingi Marjuok, meaning. Have you ever understood what they mean by that?
By the way, that name Juok, I think it is confused. There's two meanings to it that's been attributed. There's the really high divine meaning where Juok means the high god, right? Which is never used. By the way, many of our gods, we don't even use their names because we understand that they are mysterious and unknowable. But then there's Juok as the singular for the ancestors, isn't it? Because our ancestors are called Juogi. So Juogi as the plural of Juok, right? So again, we use the word Juok to sort of devolve the divinity, right? So anywhere we mentioned Juok, if we, in reference to you as a person, we are referencing that you are carrying a piece of the divine in you. Not that we don't, because we understand that we are all divine. But the ones that are endowed with the spirit of Juok are seen as the mediators.
I asked my grandfather about it, Jagero, about what it means. Yeah. And he gave me a very interesting explanation. He told me that Nyingimar Juok is the name that identifies you in the spiritual world.
Okay. Like the spirit name.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like everybody now, if you understand it now, you feel like it is your spirit ID. That when there are so many Oduors, Yeah. But he was telling me that there is an Oduor that is when the spirits talk about me, there is an idea attached to that Oduor, which I found very interesting, that in the land of the spirits or in the cosmos, the spirits can ID me and know that we only, there are several Oduors, but there is a particular ID that when mentioned, we know that it applies to Jagero, the Oduor Jagero. Exactly. And not any other person.
Right. There's that spirit name, by the way, that is given. And what I know is that there's a name that you're given by the ancestors themselves. And that applies because sometimes we, especially for our culture, we are usually named after the ancestors anyway, isn't it? So, for instance, I'm named after my late grandmother. So I would say I'm also an ancestor, yes, Awino. The full name, Mildred Awino itself, is as an ancestor. But then you see, we don't want to have those confusions. So there's usually that name that you're given. And I would say that's also part of the initiation, the ancestral initiation that happens. So not to feel, if you haven't received a name yet, not to feel like you've been left out or you're missing out on anything. But it's important to know that your name is important because it carries the powerful imprint or the energy that identifies you in the world. And this is why, and when I say the world, I mean the spirit world. Because there's a flurry of people changing their names. I mean, with all this awakening that is happening, But I also want to tell the same people that they need to go back to sit with themselves and have that conversation with, like a soulful conversation. Because by changing your name, you're changing your life path, you're changing your soul path. And it's important to understand what you're about to embark on. And also it's important to understand where your name came from.
But when they're changing their names, sometimes I feel like they're not really changing their names. They're dropping the English name.
Yes, that's different. No, that's different. That's applicable. I mean, that's not an issue at all. But there are cases where people change the full name.
Oh, the full name.
Yes. So that is what I would say is very different, or changing your life path.
So I think you did not explain a little bit of the naming. Can you talk a little specifically about naming and what it means and how the name IDs you in the cosmos?
Okay, so for us as Africans, the African thinking around naming is that we believe in the continuity of the cycle of life, right? So like the spiral, right? So we are emanating from the divine all the way from Dwok down to Awino, who's down here, right? So the name that you're given usually is given to you by the ancestors, and it comes through from the Ajuoke. Now, for those of us who are here, so sometimes the child is not even named immediately. You'd have to sit for a bit and figure out, okay, which ancestor is this that has come through this child? So we all understand in terms of our African ancestry that all of us are emanations of the ones that came before. So I am simply the latest chapter of Mildred Awino, isn't it? So I am meant to understand Mildred Awino's path to the point where I am here to complete it, the mission that she was here to do. And my descendant will be probably the one that will finish it. It's important to understand, by the way, that the name that we are given, a lot of us are very averse to the English names, and I understand that completely. And you can drop it if you feel led to. But I want us to understand that the spirit itself comes from within, right? You might change your name, but then you have not changed your psyche, you have not changed your spirit at all. And in that case, then you have not really created the change that is needed. So I want to emphasize that the change first has to come from within the self. The prompt to change the name or to give the name comes from the spirits as well. And a lot of times it comes under crisis, by the way. So when you see, especially the youth, people who are going through a lot of depression, a lot of these chronic illnesses, so many things that are there to call you or to awaken you to that reality. So when it comes to names, I'm seen as an emanation in the long line that is Mildred Awino's, or the latest in the long line that is Mildred Awino. And of course, with the understanding that there's going to be another person. By the way, very interestingly, Jagero, as an astrologer, I took time the other day. I pulled up my own birth chart. I pulled up my mother's birth chart, my late mom, and I pulled out her mother, now my also late grandmother's chart. And it was very interesting to see the common threads and to see the kind of work that they were doing here spiritually and the kind of work that I'm here to also do. We actually share the same Saturn sign. We all have Saturn in Scorpio, Saturn in Scorpio, Saturn in Scorpio. It's very interesting. And Saturn changes signs every 2 years. And my grandmother was born in the 20s. My mother was born in the 60s. I was born in the 80s. So what are the odds of such commonalities in themes, right? So I understand that my grandmother was growing up in the era of colonialism, actually. Yes. It was in the thick of things, in the 20s. So there's really nothing much she could have done. So was my mother, right? But for me, who much as I have Saturn in Scorpio, I also have Pluto in Scorpio. So I'm sort of equipped to be able to look back and dismantle a lot of things that have been holding back the generation or the lineage itself. So I'd love people to look at it from that perspective, that change comes from within, and change also comes from within the lineage itself. Yeah. Understanding your place within the lineage.
And how do you begin to understand that? So that and for what reason are you doing this? For example, when you are going back to your grandmother, you go back to your mother and then your mother and then your grandmother, and then compare the three women. That is you, your mother, and your grandmother. How is that important in life?
Oh, it's so important because, again, when we remember the importance of cycles, when we remember the importance of how much we are either doomed or fortunate to repeat cycles, how much we are here to heal generational trauma, also to heal generational curses. Yes, there are also generational blessings. But now that we're even on this topic, it's important for us to understand that by studying yourself and also studying the members of your family, you're able to actually pick up on the kind of the strains that are running through, right? Many lineages are dealing with alcoholism, for instance. And you might find that whenever I get a client, for instance, and they're dealing with alcoholism, sometimes they don't even need to say it. You can see somebody just has imprints of some kind of addiction. And it doesn't have to be alcoholism alone. It can be something else. But when you look at it and you ask them questions, you realize, oh, their father had an issue, the same issue. In some rare cases as well, it's coming from the mother's line. So it's important to know that those of the people who are dealing with such strong addictions or the kind of vices that are too strong for them, there's a reason why it's too strong for you. It's not yours.
I got to ask you this question. When I was talking to somebody, his name is Daniel Orenge, who was a very serious alcoholic. He told me that he almost died 3 times of overdosing himself on alcohol. And he was telling me that every time he drank alcohol, he would black out. And then when we were talking with him, he was telling me that he's not drinking. He later realized that he wasn't drinking because he loved the bottle, but because he was predisposed to alcoholism. And he talked about genetics, you know? So are we talking about genetics here, or we are talking about, the spirits?
Right.
Are they the same?
It's a linguistic way of describing the same thing. Because genetics uses science or uses actual physical imprints, isn't it? But there also is a strain of science called epigenetics, which looks at now how some of these traits are passed on. But the language that we use is more of a spiritual language, though it can be demonstrated through genetics. Let's put it like that. So what he's saying is true. But also another thing I would say is, someone like Daniel would fit the kind of symbol I would call the scapegoat, right? And we all have, most families have a scapegoat. And we know the scapegoats just by looking at them, not really looking at them, talking to them, but also looking at their birth charts. You'll always find, especially in the most straight-laced religious families, there's always going to be that one person who's not as straight-laced, who's not as religious. They will either be the defrocked priest, a serial criminal, either an addict, someone who's committed at some point. So a lot of these people are dealing with pain of an entire lineage. And that's why they have to self-medicate.
Why are we calling them scapegoats instead
of... scapegoats, because I say the scapegoats...
Who is scapegoating?
There's 2 things. There's scapegoat and sacrificial lambs. So scapegoat is the one who bears the weight of that particular issue or that particular vice. So that if it's addiction, the scapegoat is the one who carries it. So the scapegoat is the one that is dealing with alcoholism, the one that is dealing with either a total criminal, and if you look at the context of their family, it's the opposite. Their parents are basically even pastors, you might find. So that's why I'm calling them scapegoats. So it is not necessarily a bad term. But now it becomes negative when the scapegoat becomes a sacrificial lamb. Unfortunately, some of these ancestral curses will claim a sacrifice, isn't it? So in a way to resolve itself. So we will see the kind of alcoholic that runs themselves completely into the ground.
It's interesting because I don't know if you know about this, that is usually said in our culture, in Luo culture, that have you not heard that?
I've not heard it, but it's...
You've not heard that?
I've not heard that.
No, I think the people, for you who understands it, you understand it as a scapegoat.
Yes.
The guy who carries the burden.
Yeah, for the family.
Yes. But a lot of people see somebody whose life has really gone astray. And especially when the family is doing well. And is like a charlatan.
Yeah.
Is looking like a street kid. they will say that that one is the guy who has brought wealth into the family. He's the one who has been sacrificed.
Then that is a very astute statement. Very true, and very true. It's very astute, but the reason I'm saying that he's the one who's brought wealth is because he's the sacrifice. So that for this family to stay as is, there's always that. That's why I'm talking about the scapegoat.
Oh, I see.
Because if there's a curse in that lineage, it has to be expressed in one way or the other, and it has to claim somebody in one way or another. So it is possible, that's why I even say it is possible to be a scapegoat without becoming a sacrificial lamb, which is what I keep impressing on, especially people struggling with alcoholism.
So it might be the case, but it is not the doing of the parents.
Yeah, it's not even, sometimes it's not even your parents, because your parents are also dealing with it in terms of a lineage thing, a lineage issue. If I'm an alcoholic, say, and my father is an alcoholic, then my father's alcoholism is also coming from another side of his lineage, probably his father or his mother's side, and on in perpetuity. But I am also talking about the kind of alcoholism that claims the individual totally and completely. Because then when you become conscious of some of these curses that are running through your family, and this is why I insist that everyone must draw up a family tree. It's important because it also helps us to understand the traits of these people, and what were their eccentricities and whatnot. What were the things that they were dealing with? Then you're able to pick it up. So for me, for instance, Jagero, I would say I'm also a scapegoat.
In your family?
I'm also a scapegoat, yes.
How? Tell me more.
Remember how I mentioned that how me and my mother and my grandmother share certain imprints, right? And that imprint is very spiritual. So these were very spiritual women. But you see, their spirituality, because of the environment they were growing up in, was Christian. So they could only express their deep spirituality in a Christian way. But then here comes me, named after my grandmother, no less. So that means I am still dealing with the kind of deep spirituality that has been running through that lineage, but has been suppressed. So what then happens? It explodes. It means that the spirits, and remember how I mentioned in the last talk, it hit me in such a way that I almost went down. I needed to come back and become very, very conscious, very, very quickly, because if I hadn't done so, I would have been a sacrificial lamb. My spirituality would have been playing out in a very different way. And we have seen it. And sometimes also this really deep spirituality where it is claiming a scapegoat shows up as witchcraft or sorcery. Right.
It's very interesting because I think sometimes also we don't understand the people that have been scapegoated by the cosmos, in the sense that a lot of people look at them and say that, why we took you to the best school, we did this to you, we were always here for you. I mean, we can be able to afford, Alcohol Anonymous. We can take you there.
Yeah.
We have given you, for example, yesterday when we were going to pick the equipment, and one of our friends was really struggling with his brother, who was completely gone astray. So he was given a house to live in because he can't get his own house. He was given a shop, like everything put in that shop. His was just to run it and then sell and then use the money that he sold to restock. And he's not able to do that. And I remember the guy he doesn't understand. Why can't you work your hands like we do? So sometimes I feel like if we understood these people, where they're coming from, what the weight that is on their shoulders, then I feel like we can start treating them with a little bit of love. Absolutely. And empathy. Empathy. Because a lot of these people, we tend to ostracize them and then we now re-scapegoat them because they're like, that guy is just, they've lost it. Don't even worry about them. So we dismiss them. We almost make the whole situation worse because of how we are dealing with the situation. So I'm usually just trying to raise that awareness, even with my own clients, where I see there's a little bit of, there's an issue here, or there's somebody within the family who carries that trait, just to bring it to their attention that this is what you're dealing with. And this person actually is the one who has taken that sacrifice on behalf of the family. So even for me, I'm able to stand and speak about these things because I've gone through them. Because now I realize that because I'm the scapegoat,
I'm in charge of how this energy is manifesting in my life and in my family's life. In some ways, I have managed to harmonize the two. What my mother and my grandmother were doing as Christian women, and what I'm doing as somebody who's in African spirituality, and be able to somehow merge those two without creating any kind of conflict. And I can say so far so good. It's worked so well. I would say my family has been so supportive. So I would say in that way I'm privileged. There are others who are not as privileged, especially those who are now awakening and are waking up to their own spiritual abilities. Many of them are not being accepted in their families. So I'm quite blessed to have been able to do the work such that my family now is accepting of me.
Okay.
It's important to always bring an empathic eye to some of these individuals. And also I feel like it is important to, much as we are doing the work with the rehabilitation, there has to also be a spiritual element to it. And I think this is how we were doing it even in the old days, where somebody who's dealing with either a mental issue or a vice, there would be a two-pronged approach. So much as there's psychological, but there's also spiritual. So I feel like we have to get to a point where we can merge some of these healing modalities. Yeah.
All right.
So that's
yes, but I want to ask you a question before you go to the other topic.
Okay.
How do you deal with if somebody is bearing the burden of the family, has been scapegoated by the cosmos? Do we say that, okay, he's a gone case, he's afflicted, there is nothing we can do, let him stay in the streets, let him die of alcohol, he's the reason why we are driving big cars, he's the reason why we built a good house, he's the reason why we are doing well and we are healthy?
Not at all.
What happens?
Yeah, not at all. So I would say, back to that statement, I think the statement is more, the Luo statement is more of what I call a crypto semantics, and that is a hidden gem within a statement or a proverb. So I can definitely see what the hidden gems are under that, because it understands and appreciates that the family is able to exist because somebody is bearing the weight of their shadows, the collective shadows. So I'll definitely say this person needs, first of all, psychological assistance or support. So they need to be able to sit down and be able to go through and appreciate what's going on, not just in their own lives, but their families' lives. So there's a psychological approach to that. But there's also the spiritual approach. Now, this is where a lot of people or a lot of families would not even want to do it, because then they would imagine these are now the devilish things.
Yes.
But I would definitely kwa mganga. But again, mganga is important because mganga is a healer. Chawi is a sorcerer. So there's a difference. So, and that's why the same thing with the Ajuoke, who are healers. I know it's like they're very rare right now and few and far between that are genuine. But
they've been ostracized, man. People don't want to hear about them.
Yes, that's why they have disappeared. You really will not hear about them out here. Much as we're in the digital age, many of the traditional healers are still in that world where it's for you to look for me, not necessarily. And
when I was researching some of the topics that we were supposed to discuss with you, I googled the healers, and I came across so many websites that have no face. They don't put their faces.
Yes, and in fact, they don't put any kind of their likeness, because again, there are so many principles. And remember, there's the traditional worldview, and now there's the modern worldview. The traditional worldview is a bit more very cautious, because we understand that we live in a world where not everyone is for what you're doing. Not everyone is going to look at you as a positive influence, and they also understand the power of projection.
I like the word positive influence.
Exactly. So when they see you, for instance, Jagger, if we just put a size or skirt on you right now, the way you're looking, there's a projection people will put on you, will place on you, and then they will treat you according to that projection, whether it's positive or negative. But for the most part, it's probably going to be with suspicion, isn't it? So a lot of them really don't want to deal with that. They want to focus on their craft, on what they are doing. And I would see that, because even for me, much as I'm on the modern side of things, I also struggle with just putting myself out there, or the likeness, much as, am I going to do a reel, or am I going to do a TikTok? We understand that there's so much energy out there that you need to preserve your energy. Let people come to your office or come to, where you're set up. but as opposed to the other way around. You're using too much energy. And also, we understand that there are people who might, because of that, they might, what can I call it? It's called, what can I call it? Spiritually speaking. Is it the evil eye? The easiest way I can put it is the evil eye. Okay, so you don't want somebody to sort of latch on to you. We understand as practitioners that people can take up our energy and we can be left with nothing. Okay, so if I sit here, in some ways, people are consuming what I'm saying. From where I'm sitting, as somebody who deals with energy, that already drains me of enough energy. Leave alone sitting down with a client. Sitting down with a client, I'll have drained some of my energy as well. Because remember this, Jagero, when you come to me and you're going through a particular life crisis, by the time you're leaving, you're feeling much lighter, isn't it? What does that mean? Now that we know energy cannot be dissipated, cannot be transferred, right? So I'm left with that energy. I'm carrying that burden for you, but I'll know how I'll deal with it later. So you see, we have to manage how we are distributing our energy, which also entails our image.
You're now giving me the vibes of a Nigerian.
I've tapped into West Africa. I've tapped into West Africa. I was speaking to another Nigerian here.
Yes.
Now that you're looking like a proper Nigerian.
A lot of people say I look like Nigerian. And I think in this one, they're going to say, ooh. You know?
Yeah. So, unless you have another question.
No, we can go ahead, yes.
Okay, yeah. So, that was just with regards to the ancestors. I'll still get back to that. So, with our creator gods, like I said, these are the ones who now we would beseech in prayers, right? Now Nyasai. Instead of praying to Jok, we'd pray to Nyasai through the sun. Right, through the sun. And this is not just us, right, because even the God of the Old Testament is also prayed to through the sun. In the book of Psalms, David calls him God is a sun and a shield. So because the iconography of the sun means that it is simply like an energy transferer, because the sun is not the end of the cosmos, isn't it? The sun is part of a galaxy, and the galaxy is also part of a larger universe. So already there's that contemplation of something other than the creator God, who has to do with human affairs. And we've also seen this in with the Greeks as well. Another thing I want to mention is in terms of the ancestors. Remember how we talked about the waters, isn't it? And that's where even the white chalk that we sort of smear ourselves with comes from. Now it's important, always important, to understand that the ancestors are not they're not gods and they're not worshipped. They are simply venerated or honored. And you can see it in homes or families where the ancestors are not honored. There tends to be an issue, and a very big one. And we are the ones who, on this side as healers, have to deal with that fallout. And let's not even look at the family. The family, in fact, is the smallest group unit. The largest one is the nation, isn't it? And the nation has its ancestors who are venerated, the founding fathers. To the founding fathers. And that's even why where they are buried at the mausoleums, where we are able to go, and there are presidents who will come and they will still go and pay their respects to this day to the mausoleums of the first fathers. And I believe even if our president goes to the other one, that will still be part of their tours and their routines. So if we can honor the ancestors of our nation, why should we not honor the ancestors of the family? Right? Because if you don't remember where you came from, then in some way you are unrooted, right? There's an element of being unrooted. And another thing, the ancestors really help us. And this is where I'm talking about the ancestors who are the holy ancestors, the ones who are there for the benefit of the family. Because not all ancestors are going to be positive, right? So the name itself is neutral. There are those ancestors who, and I wouldn't even call them ancestors, the ones who have died but for some reason still have some unfinished business with the family. So they almost operate like demons within the family. So those might even be the ones who are bearing the curses that are going through the lineages. So the ones who are here for our benefit, they're the ones who in some ways hold fort for us. They fight off a lot of these spiritual attacks, a lot of spiritual warfare, and that's why a lot of those of us who work with ancestors walk with them on a daily basis as if they were the angels themselves, and also with the angels. right? So we understand that there is no conflict with having ancestors as our mediators, because they're the ones who are in our family. They understand the issues. They can therefore become our lawyers, and then now the creator gods are usually only prayed to in extreme crisis, and I mean in matters that affect the entire tribe or the entire community. So if there's a drought, for instance, then we would pray to Nyasai as one cause, isn't it? Bring the rain. And you see, the rain is not just for a particular family or particular village, it's for the entire land, isn't it? And the same thing would happen even with the Kikuyus. They would go to the mountain in times of crisis that affects the entire community. But for day-to-day matters or issues to do with the family, they would visit the diviners, the healers, and they would deal with the ancestors. And those diviners and healers would do their divination with respect to the ancestors.
Before I forget, when there is something that is interesting that you've said, that we need to honor them.
Yeah.
How does this honor, how do we execute this honor? How do we do this honor?
The easiest thing, and I think anybody can do this, just to ensure that, number one, their graves back home are not neglected, right? They're trying not to, because you'll go to a home and you look at the state of where people are buried. That will tell you a lot about the spiritual state of that family or of that particular homestead. So just ensure that their graves are well kept. Maybe, and there are families who don't believe in having those remembrances, those yearly or 5-yearly. There are those who don't think those are important. Those are absolutely very important. Another way to honor the ancestors without dealing with the grave or, the image of the ancestors is to have family gatherings back at home, by the way. It's very important. And when you're there with the gatherings, you could, during the feast, you could work with the animals or eat the animals that are seen to be friends of the ancestors. So in Luo land, we have the goat. If you slaughter a goat and you do a feast, you prepare a feast and call your family members, that already is enough. It's already enough to bring a lot of blessings to the ancestors. It is interesting
that when where I have built at home, my father and mother and my brother's kid are buried there.
Oh, wow.
But right now, we don't know where those graves exactly are. So when I was building my home, my brother, who is now deceased, kept telling me that I think this is where they were buried. But I don't know. So the builders were so afraid to break ground that they decided to leave, they had to really move completely away
from that
area. But then what I've always wanted was to build a slab, a slab for my mother, and a slab for my father, and my brother's boy that was bitten by a dog and died.
Oh my.
But I don't know where they are exactly. I can't. So, do you think that it's important to just put a commemoration kind of thing, or it must be right on top of the grave where it was?
Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be on top of the grave itself. For instance, my brother died like in 94, almost 30 years ago. And we have issues, detecting where exactly it is. We only know the general area.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean that because you can't locate it, that you can't sort of commemorate the person. So you can still do the slab because the person is buried within that compound. So it still matters. It doesn't matter whether they are buried there or they're buried there, as long as it's still within the area itself. So that's one. Two, maybe if you're quite concerned and you wanted to build, maybe you can have a healer or a diviner just come in and do the necessary rituals, propitiation, that's what we call it, to just sort of welcome the ancestors and to invite them to sort of bring good fortune.
That's very scary.
Oh, no, not at all. It's very simple, because for us, we never used to do rituals that are not, what can I call it? For instance, when we make a sacrifice wasn't done for its own sake, right? Like if we slaughter a goat, it's not a sacrifice per se, because it will be consumed, it will be eaten. So that's the difference between when we say sacrifice in African context and when we say sacrifice in another context that is maybe from, let's say, the magical traditions of the West or Europe. So our sacrifices were to be consumed. So that's why when I say, you can gather at home and just sort of go and eat it, that's already considered an offering to the ancestors, because what are you offering other than the animal itself? You're actually gathering and showing them that, yeah, we are here, we support family unity, and we want you to bless us. It always comes with some form of blessing following that. Now, having said that, it reminds me of something else, because we have, even within our own culture, the two things where we have the ancestral spirits, but we also have the destructive spirits, who are the demonic or demonic spirits. But we don't really call them demons. We just call them destructive spirits. In our culture, we call them Jochiende and what have you. Yes. But then we also have jinn. Even in Luo, the Luo kind of cosmology, we also have jinn. Though it's rare, and it's only practitioners who would work with the jinn.
What they call in Mombasa, majini.
Yes, what we call majini. And you say jinn are just, we call them juogi of the ocean for us.
But that is why what I wanted to ask you actually, when we started this conversation, the water, what water means in the spirit. Because remember when we started, we talked about the floods being used, in a lot of mythologies. Did you say the word is mythology? Yeah. So what is, and then when you go to the coast, they are called majini, meaning from the ocean. From the ocean. Yeah. So what is going on here with the water and the spirits? Because even in Luo land, you remember they used to say that, nam negi yamo. And that yamo was actually the spirits. And sometimes they would even say that that yamo can actually capsize a boat. People can just go to fish and they don't come back. Yeah. And the people in the village would say that yamo the kodge. They have gone with the spirit. Yeah. Yeah. So what is the idea between, what is this relationship between spirits and water?
That's even great, because it's one of the things I was even going to get to.
Yes.
But now that you brought it up, so the water again is the hub of creation, actually, all creation, because before the earth was formed, it was only water, isn't it? It's only chaos. So water is like the amniotic fluid. The seas, the oceans are the amniotic fluids of the planet itself. So, and if you notice, in African cosmology, water is associated with healing as a result, healing because it is cleansing, it is a cleansing agent, and also it is associated with wealth. So that's why even in West Africa, there's a whole industrial complex around marine spirits. I think you've also heard of those ones.
Yes.
Right? So even in Lake Victoria, we have the spirits there, and then we also have, there's a feminine spirit there that they used to call Mildred.
Mildred, yes.
Mildred, the actual literal ones.
Or in our place along the river, we call it Minnam, the mother of the waters.
There you go. Yes. And usually the deities of waters tend to be feminine as a result, right?
That is why we have the mermaid and things like that.
Sirens and all that. So there's that feminine and Mami Water and what have you, Yemaya, Oshun, or Lukun, all of those type of entities or deities that are associated with the waters. Now, of course, there's that positive element, yes, because there's a whole marine kingdom that is associated with these deities. And many of these spirits, associated spirits, come from those marine kingdoms. But of course, not all of those entities would be positive. They will also have the negative spirits, right? Like now the ones that would bear away the fishermen. There are some who can't go fishing without taking along an animal to sacrifice or to give to the lake before they are given the dues of the lake. Because again...
The dues of the lake.
Yes, the dues. Because the fish that comes from there is what will give you your wealth, isn't it? So the wealth that comes from the ocean is through its animals, isn't it? So if you want wealth from the lake, you must also give something in return. In some ways, it was a way of us acknowledging or respecting nature, that there has to be some form of exchange, not just an sort of entitlement where we are going in and we are pillaging our resources. I think some of these things are also there to act as deterrents against pillaging or overfishing. So some of these cosmologies have just grown over time to become these entire things. Now, when it comes to jinn, there's the kind of, they're associated with wealth as far as we are concerned in Luo land. They're associated with wealth, but the wealth that they bring is different from the wealth the ancestors bring. So there's those two kinds of spirits, the ancestral spirits and then the elemental spirits of the water, because water is an element, isn't it? Right? And then the air element, like you said, Yamo, spirits are made out of, composed of fire and air elements. But again, we have water spirits as well. Now, when it comes to that, the kind of wealth that the ancestors give you, and this is why the ancestors insist that it is better to work with them than with, say, elementals, is that the kind of wealth they give you can be traced. It can be traced. For instance, someone will say, hey, Jagero, oh no, you see, he's wealthy because his grandfather's grandfather left him some land or blah, 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 some business, something that passed down back to you. But the kind of wealth that the elemental, say like a jinn, will bring you is very, nobody can see the source, right? Today you'll be like this, Jagero, tomorrow you'll wake up. Finally, you're like the richest man in the world. Well, and people will be wondering, wait, what is this person even doing?
Wash guy?
Yeah, what are you doing? What's going on? What's going on with you? So it's about the wealth that can be, whose source, rather. Where the source can be seen and where the source can't be seen. And we've seen this even in mythologies, stories, folktales, Luo folktales, where the tale of Nyamgondo, who picked an old lady from the lake, and then she came with a lot of wealth. And then when he scorned her, she went right back and carried all her things, all the cattle, all the livestock, all the wealth she came with, all followed her back into the ocean.
This Nyamgondo Mawudumbare story, it basically talks about that, the wealth that you can get from the water, or from the
water
air.
Spirits, yeah, from the elemental spirits.
Elemental spirits.
Yeah. And even when you get that kind of wealth, you have to be very careful. It's not something that is yours, because it can always go back. It can always disappear. There's always some kind of condition that you have to fulfill, one, or two, even when you pass on, your descendants have to continue fulfilling some of those conditions, which is why we say the wealth that is given through certain elementals, certain, not all, leads to you paying in perpetuity with your descendants, right? So that could also be another source of a generational curse. You might not know, your grandfather's grandfather may have been Nyamgondo or done something similar to Nyamgondo, and therefore you people are wealthy. But again, down the line, you kind of have to fulfill certain conditions for you to keep or maintain that wealth. Another thing about the jinn is, and in this case from a Luo perspective, the kind of sacrifices that are given to the ancestors, you can consume, you can eat, like I mentioned, the goats and what have you, the chicken, kienyeji chicken, aluru, such birds. But then sacrifices offered to jinn cannot be consumed. Right, so that already will tell you the kind of spirit that you're dealing with. So there's sort of rules and regulations when you're dealing with some of these hierarchies, right? So I would definitely say the ancestors come, the jinn, because the jinn outlive entire generations. So I would say they're just under the ancestors, because you might find a case where you've dealt with or run into a certain jinn, and it wasn't a good encounter. So the jinn decides, okay, this person, for instance, has scorned me or whatever the case might be. They'll wait for you to pass on, to live and pass on, and they'll deal with your kids, or they'll deal with your children's children. And because they outlive many generations, they know your ancestors more or better than you do, which is also probably another reason why many diviners in Luo land used to work with some of these jinn.
Yeah,
because of
that is interesting, because I've seen. But again, a lot of people have, when people don't understand things, they sort to theories and rumors and things that don't work. Because even in my village, there are so many people that used to be very wealthy. But then that wealth just begins to disappear. And however much they try to hold on to that wealth, it keeps going. It keeps going until these people even become beggars at the end of the day. But I've seen people that had lots of buses on the road, you know, and their homes were like, they had electricity, generators during the night, and you could see that their homes were all lit up at night. And then those things just decided to they started disappearing, and they disappeared. Those buses were grounded. They started drying millets on top of those buses, you know, and those buses just get eroded and eroded, and everybody, you know, children goes to drinking, they can't build.
Wow.
Things just go and go and go. And however much you try to hold on to it, it just goes. And then people will be like, now he's the guy that used to work with him probably is dead.
Probably died, probably died or conned the spirit in one way or another. Something could have happened. You know, it's very interesting when you start studying this. And another way that some of these curses can play out is through mismanagement of ancestral wealth. Right, and we all know that our culture is patriarchal, isn't it? So if it is mismanaged by the patriarchs and the men of that lineage, then that wealth or the wealth potential of that family moves to the ladies, the women, the daughters, migogos of that home. So you find that where they are married, those are the places that now start prospering. But the men of that home, the sons or the men or the head of that home, is the opposite. So you can find such cases as well. Those are also cases that tell you there's some mismanagement that has been happening, because ideally the wealth should be coming through the father, the brothers, the male line, right? Because the understanding is the daughters will be married off, right? So it's very interesting when you start comparing and contrasting. So in our culture, even the traditional advogers will tell you, well, you're better off working with your ancestors, with Jogi, because Jogi, they know you. They are there for you. They are here for your interests, not necessarily impersonal elemental spirits, because it becomes a transaction. When you're dealing with a jinn, it's a pure transaction. And if you do not hold up your end, then you start seeing such things happening down the line. And a lot of these issues are generational. It's not even something you necessarily have to see in this life. It might show up with your children or your children's children. Then now people like us have to, we are brought certain issues when it's 2 or 3 generations down the line. Then you have to deal with that whole situation. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting. We spoke about wealth, healing, and the waters, and how a lot of these deities of the waters are feminine, feminine deities. I also wanted to mention how in certain parts of Africa, you will see there's a very straight line. There's a supreme god, there's a creator god, the ancestors, and what have you. But there are also other cultures where you have the supreme being, and then you have an entire pantheon of gods, like the Orishas, and then you have the ancestors. So you'll see in those kinds of societies, even the dynastic Egypt, because they also have the pantheons, it is associated with state formation, it is associated with god kings, it is associated with the kind of organization that happens as above so below, because if you look at the stories of the Orishas, there were fights that were happening between the gods, and as a result some of the gods reproduced and they had daughters and sons, etc. So we can see how through the stories of the gods, it is actually telling the story of the culture of that particular society, and how they organize themselves to a point where now they are a city-state. And you can see how West Africa actually has so many, even Ghana, it has so many, it was actually one of the biggest and most prosperous one. Also, we have the fertility goddesses, we have the rain gods, by the way, the rain gods, and these ones are associated with agriculture, right? And you can also see how we organize ourselves around that, and how I talked about the firmament and the waters being above the firmament. So then the rain gods would be operating above the firmament, for instance. So that's why a lot of the rain gods were dwelling in the sky, not to be confused with the ocean mothers, right? Although I have heard of rain goddesses, even local ones. The Meru have a rain goddess, Gombe. Then you have gods of iron and smith working, right? The ones who then have to do with, remember how during the Iron Age, and this can also give you some sort of pointers as to at what point in history were some of these were Africans coming up in the art of metalsmithing, and that can tell you when we have deities that have to do with copper or iron, and these are also the same gods of war as well. And again, I wanted to talk about the role of the destructive spirits as I talked about them. Yes, some of them can be used to bring about wealth, but formally, within African society, demons and destructive spirits were called upon only during times of warfare. Right, so when the warriors had to go, and that's why we had the Oloibons and these people they were not just war generals, but they were also spiritualists. So they're the ones who would be the priests to mediate some of these spirits. And it meant that after coming back from war, they had to be cleansed from these spirits, because you can't come with the destructive spirits and re-enter society. Right, so we don't see that happening now, of course, which is why, I don't know, maybe there needs to be a study that is done about the kind of PTSD that soldiers go through. That's why many of them there has to be some aftercare that happens because of the atrocities that they have to go through. So for us, in our societies, we almost used to desensitize the warriors before they went. But when they came back, we would reorient them so that they would enter society as complete individuals.
Yeah. Great. So I think a lot of information. I think the reason people should be able to, the reason why I started dialogues with Jagero is so that we can go deeper. We can scratch the surface, go deeper. And even though we fear these things, let us hear properly about them and hear them. Because, for example, as we have already discussed, in my culture, the Luo culture or the Nilotic culture, there are so many of these murmurings, there are so many of these theories, there are so many of these Yamo and the spirits, and no one comes out to articulate them. Well, a Christian might disagree with them, somebody else might disagree with them, but that is, at least there is an explanation that you can run away with and say that, okay, these things that I've been hearing about, this is perhaps what it is. This is another theory that explains what has been bothering me. For example, for me, my take home from this, the first episode of this spirit, this series, what did we call
it? African cosmology.
Yes, the African cosmology. The cosmology of African religions.
Yes.
The cosmology of African religions. What I'm going out with really as an important topic or an important part of the discussion was the idea of the person that carries the weight of the family. The scapegoat.
Yes,
it's a very important thing, and I think in my family we have such kind of people. Within my in-laws, there is a little bit of rumors about what is going on there. So it's very important to be pleasantly surprised about ways through which members of the family tend to go different routes. Some are drowning, catching at straws and things like that.
Indeed.
So Mildred, thank you very much for this first episode.
Anytime.
We'll be discussing the second episode. People, ladies and gentlemen, people of the internet, my name is Otur Jagero, and this was Dialogues with Jagero with Mildred Awino. Mildred Awino is a diviner, a tarot reader. That is correct. And then you said an astrologer. So I believe that we are going to be leaving her contacts. What kind of contacts did you leave? The email or the number or both?
The email and the Facebook page, whichever works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then if you have questions and you want your services to be customized, not in generalities that we have talked today, you can always reach out to her. Most of the people sort of confuse the guests that we have and dialogues with Jagero. So most of them reach out to me as if I am the person that is doing this thing. I've had problems with Matheka because a lot of people are reaching out to me thinking that I'm Matheka.
Right.
So we will leave her contact over there in the description, and you can always reach out to her so that whichever problem that you're having, the concern you're having, the questions that you're having, you can always direct them directly to Mildred. Please don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Please like and follow our Facebook channels, that is TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and X, or Twitter as we know it. Until another episode, bye for now.